Versatility is the hallmark of a good shinobi. Whenever we see shinobi and Naruto get into fights, it's usually composed of a wide range of techniques that span across at least 2 of the 3 basic jutsu types, that being ninjutsu, taijutsu, and genjutsu. Whether it's Sasuke vs Itachi, Kakashi vs Zabuza, or Naruto vs Pain, these fights put on display the heights of shinobi combat. However, there is one character that is severely underrated as it relates to their jutsu repertoire, that being Kabuto Yakushi. Kabuto for a long time has been relegated to an afterthought in most Naruto conversations, which is why today I want to take a deep dive into his bag to show exactly why his jutsu arsenal is unrivaled. But before we begin, make sure to like this video and subscribe. We're shooting for 20k. Now, when speaking about Kabuto's jutsu proficiency, the best place to start off with is what he was introduced as being a master of, that being medical ninjutsu. Tsunade tells us early on that the role of a medic ninja demands a different set of skills from that of a warrior. To utilize the chakra, it takes a light and precise hand, an enormous amount of expertise, an adeptness at practical application, patience, and a particular quality that is intrinsically required if you want to be a first-rate medic. But for Kabuto, he showed all of these qualities at just the age of 5. The first time we get any mention of Kabuto's history of medicine is in the Chunin exams, where it's revealed that during the Battle of Kikyo Pass, an elite Jonin of the Konoha Medical Corps took in a child survivor, with that child being Kabuto himself. Kabuto as a child, before even becoming a shinobi, is shown to be proficient in the Mystic Palm Jutsu, which he used while he worked in the Leaf's medical bay. The Mystic Palm Jutsu, or Palm Sage Jutsu, is the most common form of medical ninjutsu in the series. Using chakra in the hands, this technique heals injuries both inside and outside the body. By sending chakra through the hands and placing it on the injured area, the user can accelerate cell regeneration and treat wounds. It is effective for healing injuries and illness, and by finely adjusting the chakra, it can even be used to restore damaged organs. However, because extremely precise chakra control is required, it is difficult for ordinary ninja to use. Depending on the user's skill, the healing effect and speed can vary greatly, and in some cases it can even be used during combat. During the Chunin exams, Kabuto is shown not only using the technique to treat Hinata's heart injuries from her fight with Neji, but also attack with it to incapacitate Kiba. This is pretty much the standard use for the technique. However, Kabuto is so proficient with it that he's able to extend his mystic palm across what seems to be several feet to almost immediately heal wounds inflicted by Four Tails Naruto. Kabuto also isn't restricted to only healing with hand signs, as similar to Tsunade's mitotic regeneration, he can use his chakra to activate his cells, to reproduce them, and recover from damage inflicted by Naruto's Rasengan, with the only difference being that his isn't automatic. The only reason why it didn't work completely though was because he had run out of chakra and sustained too much damage. Now, while we're on that topic, it's a good time to mention his other chakra palm technique and his most lethal one, that being his chakra scalpel. The chakra scalpel is a medical ninjutsu whose original use was for performing surgery, but Kabuto took it and made it a battle-ready combat tool. In his fight against Tsunade, he was able to land multiple strikes with this technique, and in doing so was able to inflict damage to her muscles, including her biceps, brachii, and rectus femoris. The thing that makes the chakra scalpel so special though is the fact that it can cut your vital organs without any external injury, which is why with just a touch to her upper sternum, Kabuto was able to slice up her intercostal muscles, hindering her ability to breathe. This was so impressive to Tsunade that she thought to herself that his jutsu instincts and sharpness surpassed even her own in her prime. But it doesn't just stop there, since Kabuto can use the scalpel to cut the chakra networks in the body with more efficiency than the gentle fist, since it doesn't require him to use the Byakugan and all he needs to do is make contact. It's also useful as a standard cutting tool as well, having the ability to cut through wood and flesh like butter, as seen against Yamato Sasori's disguise and with his mother in his flashback, which essentially means that unless you have heightened durability or a way to enhance your durability, you're more than likely getting sliced open, and even if you do have enhanced durability, the scalpel can bypass your skin altogether to attack your insides without making any external wounds. Now, the next ability that Kabuto possesses, and the reason the Akatsuki could even participate in the 4th grade Shinobi War, is the summoning Impure World Reincarnation, or Edo Tensei. The first data book describes it as a sinful summoning technique that brings the dead back from this world. It uses the living people that had been sacrificed as vessels to bind the dead to the earthly realm. When it makes the soul of the dead descend into the sacrifice, the rubble surrounding them wrap the bodies and take the form of their bodies when they were alive. The jutsu itself is considered a forbidden technique for its excessive inhumanity, and its existence is a secret. Now, I'm not gonna be going into the ability too deep since this isn't an Edo Tensei explained video. Let me know if y'all want that in the future, but there are certain things related to the jutsu itself which puts into perspective how impressive Kabuto was for pulling it off in the scale that he did. For one, Kabuto stated that he had surpassed both Tobirama and Orochimaru at using the technique, which is pretty cool since Tobirama is the literal creator of the jutsu. Adding on to that, we're told that the Edo Tensei has a sort of binding function that stops the Edo Tensei from doing whatever they want, and the power of that binding is correlated to the strength of the caster. Most of the Edo Tensei would not want to be controlled and thus would be resisting, which means that Kabuto was simultaneously controlling and binding most of his high tier Edo Tensei summons across multiple battlefields. A common misconception that people have is that Madara undid his Edo Tensei binding. However, this isn't what happened. What Madara did was rescind or nullify the Edo Tensei summoning contract so his soul didn't get sent back to the Pure Lands after the jutsu was deactivated. Madara never broke the binding that Kabuto had on him that allowed him to control his body, and only rescinded the contract after Kabuto was defeated, which could be interpreted as Madara not trying to undo the binding. However, Madara isn't the type of person to just willingly allow someone to have that sort of power over him if he had the ability to set himself free. But aside from that though, his arsenal of summons are godly as well. He can summon Madara, Nagato, Itachi, the rest of the Akatsuki, 6 Jinchurikis and their tailed beasts, the previous Gokage including Gengetsu, Mu, Rasa and the 3rd Raikage, the 7 ninja swordsmen, Kinkaku and Ginkaku, and a plethora of other high Jonin tier combatants, and utilize their abilities. This would give him access to the Tengai Shinsei, Tsukuyomi, Chibaku Tensei, Totsuka Blade, every Rinnegan ability, Particle Style, Tail Beast Bombs, and the Perfect Susanoo. These are all abilities that Kabuto just gets by proxy of having and setting up this jutsu, as well as having the massive advantage of having an army of people that share vision with him. Now, the next ability that Kabuto has in his arsenal, which is something that most people in the verse couldn't even dream of achieving, is his Sage Mode, or more specifically his Snake Sage Mode. Sage Mode is a type of Senjutsu that employs the use of Sage Chakra or Sage Jutsu to attain a form that amplifies all of your stats. As opposed to regular ninjutsu where you utilize your own internal energy, i.e. manipulating your mental and physical energies, Sage Jutsu involves taking the internal generated chakra and adding nature energy from the outside to create an even more powerful chakra that amplifies your ninjutsu, genjutsu, taijutsu, durability, and sensory capabilities. There are various different ways of attaining this. However, in Kabuto's case, it was a bit more tricky and dangerous than Naruto, Jiraiya, and Minato due to the methodology of the White Snake Sage, who is the sole teacher of Snake Sage Mode. The 4th data book describes him as the boss of Ryuchi Cave that gives off miraculous authority. The Snake Sage that reigns in Ryuchi Cave, which takes the name of unexplored region together with Mount Miyaboku and the Shikotsu Forest. His white, huge frame becomes one with the vast land on top of the lengthy sacred seat and injects natural energy, piercing his fangs into the ones who came there to train. They say that he swallows those whose bodies couldn't stand it and turn into a snake whole. This is exactly why I said this method was more dangerous, since the Snake Sage basically gives you a trial by fire where only those worthy will survive, and thus only them will get the opportunity of learning it. Orochimaru actually tried to acquire Sage Mode before Kabuto, however he failed due to not having a body that could tolerate the copious amounts of nature energy being pumped into his body. Learning from these mistakes, Kabuto sought out the DNA of members of Jugo's clan, seen as though they had a natural aptitude at controlling nature energy, and genetically modified his body to develop those traits. In doing so, he attained a body capable of withstanding high volumes of nature energy, and as such became the only stated perfect sage within the series. But it doesn't just stop there, since while he was at Ryuchi Cave, Kabuto was taught various senjutsu or sage arts, the first of which being the sage art White Rage, which is one of the more broken abilities in the series. It's a technique that only those who trained at Ryuchi Cave and mastered the sage transformation can handle. It changes the natural energy gathered inside the body into a dragon of light and releases it from the mouth. It paralyzes the sense of sight and hearing with the light and sound that are generated immediately after, and the sense of feeling by means of the intense oscillation of the air, and blocks the movements. With the corneas of a snake and an internal liquefaction, only the jutsu user can elude its effects. It's also stated that it's impossible to sustain techniques even while in the middle of using them due to the oscillation in the air. This is shown directly against Sasuke and Itachi, where due to the light and sound oscillating in the air, they lost their sight and hearing, had paralysis of the senses, and were frozen in place. Sasuke also notes that he can't maintain his Susanoo while affected by the jutsu. However, due to his snake eyes and liquid body, something we'll cover later, he's basically immune to the effects. The second jutsu is the sage art Inorganic Reanimation, which basically gives him control over whatever battlefield he's on. By filling the atmosphere with natural energy, this sage art can be used to enslave inorganic substances such as the earth. Amongst the various sage modes, only those who have mastered the sage art of Ryuchi Cave are allowed to wield it. As the earth is infused with life, a pulse violently courses through its blood vessels, causing it to swell outward. The ground, as well as the walls and ceiling, begin to rumble like a living organism, and the spines protruding from its flesh walls can be manipulated in order to impale an opponent. Not much is shown apart from the description of its functionality, but we do know that it was able to mutilate Edo Itachi's body, which is pretty cool. Now, the next ability that Kabuto has, which is sort of a mixture of a whole bunch of other abilities, is his strange transmission Distant Shadow. Kabuto, who became able to use the attack of the twin demons by assimilating Sakon cells, who was one of the Sound 5, enhanced even more the application of their techniques. Assimilating other people's cells in his own body, he became able to use these characters' techniques as he pleased. He makes the upper half of the jutsu user appear from his body with the technique of the twin demons, and these bodies are able to use the technique thereafter. He can use even bloodline limits as long as he assimilates the cells, and in theory there are no jutsu that he can't use. It's a highly strategic technique for Kabuto himself, who can move as he pleases even while he's using it. Note that the ability of Strange Transmission is just the assimilation of the cells, which allows you to use the abilities of those whose DNA you have implanted in yourself. Kabuto, however, is specifically using a modified version of Sakon and Ukon's Kekkei Genkai, so he can offload the jutsu casting, freeing himself up to do other things. The base ability of the attack of the twin demons allows Ukon to move freely inside Sakon's body during battle. Since Ukon can make his feet, arms, and even face exit any part of Sakon's body, they're able to confuse the enemy in melee combat with unpredictable techniques. Kabuto, however, takes the concept and applies it differently, where instead of having a whole separate person operating inside his body, he creates clones of them and has those take advantage of the jutsu. Obviously, all of this would imply that Kabuto has access to every single ability of every person whose DNA he has access to, plus the jutsus he created with them as the basis. Explaining all of the abilities for all of the people Kabuto is confirmed to have DNA of would be tedious, so I'll just go over the ones that are mentioned and shown in the manga. The first is Suigetsu's Jutsu Hydrification, which is a jutsu that renders physical attacks ineffective by liquefying one's body at will. This jutsu boasts a high strategic effectiveness because in addition to allowing one to avoid an enemy's attack during a close-range battle, it allows one to infiltrate buildings and launch surprise attacks from a liquefied state. This is precisely what I was referring to earlier when I mentioned Kabuto having a liquid body. However, it isn't completely one-to-one, since the version Kabuto uses is a modified version where instead of turning into water, it liquefies the body itself into goop. Kabuto also states that he acquired a healing ability from studying Karin's body, which is most likely in reference to Karin's heal bite. The technique allows Karin to completely heal the damage Sasuke sustained from being skewered by Killer Bee, so it would be reasonable to assume that most forms of conventional damage would be healed through a combination of both Karin and Suigetsu's techniques. The next one is the power of the White Snake, which gives him all of the Orochimaru abilities such as snake substitution, regeneration, and increased chakra. However, most of what Kabuto would be benefiting from it would be passive effects since he doesn't really need the other abilities given what we've covered so far. I guess he could also use the living corpse reanimation to steal people's bodies, but again that's neither here nor there, he really doesn't need it. Next is Kidomaru's spiderweb unrolling jutsu, which is a web that captures and contains all enemies attacking from the front. The sticky and elastic threads are so strong that even an elephant pulling each end would not break them. The enemy is crucified, unable to budge a single muscle, let alone fight back. Once captured, their fate is in the hands of Kidomaru. He catches his enemy off guard by releasing it while in the air. Even Naruto's en masse attack with his specialty shadow clones is rendered null. The chakra charged threads cannot be cut by even a dagger blade, and this is shown in Kabuto's fight where Sasuke stated that these strands cannot be cut by a blade, which forces both of them to use a Amaterasu to counter it. The next one is Jirobo's Earth Shore Return, which is described as a certain technique that Jirobo made his strong point. He overthrows the ground striking the Earth's surface just like the tatami returns and protects himself with this wall of earth. Jirobo used it in his battle with Choji, but it's a technique that in itself suits the defense of a long distance attack by means of shuriken and kunai. Kabuto in particular used it to open up the earth and divert Itachi's Amaterasu to the side so he could properly set up attacks against him and Sasuke. Finally, we have Kimimaaru's Bracken Dance or Dance of the Seedling Fern. Preternatural, the countless bones rise from underground as so many claws from a dragon or some such fantastic beast. Contrarily to what the mildness of the name implies, for a jutsu it's an incredibly brutal one. For the jutsu indiscriminately slaughters whoever stands on the ground surface down to the last man. The blades of bones can be as many as 1,000 or up to tens of thousands, but Kabuto specifically used it to a lesser extent against Sasuke and Itachi, opting to create a smaller patch of bones rather than the tens of thousands Kimimaaru decided to make when he was alive. Now for the last section, it makes sense to end off with one of the more underrated aspects of Kabuto's game, that being his Genjutsu. Kabuto is shown to use only 2 Genjutsu within the series, with the first one being a Genjutsu he took from Tayuya, that being the musical Chains of Fantasia, one of the Genjutsu that rely on the sound of the flute. Whoever hears it will be assailed by the vivid sensation that their limbs have been fastened with sturdy ropes, thus becoming unable to move about freely. At the same time, they are fed morbid hallucinations, which makes it also possible to run them down mentally. Given that the means of transmission is sound-based, it has a large range of effectiveness, on top of which it can be applied even without knowledge of the enemy's position, which makes for an exceedingly convenient jutsu. Arms and legs restrained, in addition to which a Genjutsu despoils one of any peace of mind. Even without physical intervention from an outside force, the body is robbed of all mobility and consciousness itself progressively fades away. This is by far one of the most broken abilities in Kabuto's arsenal, since unlike Tayuya who can have her version broken by 12-year-old Shikamaru, Kabuto was able to trap both Sasuke and Itachi in this Genjutsu, with neither being able to free themselves on their own. It's also noted to have the ability to bypass the defenses of the Susanoo, which makes sense given that the jutsu is propagated by sound and the Susanoo are obviously not soundproof. I will say that Itachi and Sasuke were able to eventually break free, but only because they had each other there to cast simultaneous Genjutsu on each other. If it were the case that either of them weren't there, then it would be hard to believe that they would individually be able to escape. Now last but not least is Kabuto's most infamous and iconic jutsu, the Temple of Nirvana Genjutsu. A Genjutsu that generates a fluttering rain of sleep-inducing illusionary white feathers. Whoever sees them as they fall, piling up and covering the whole target area, will experience Eden-like bliss and fall into into a state of tranquil slumber. No matter how much one resists the hypnotic spell, the desire to sleep is instinctive and there's no fighting it. Kabuto, as we all know, used this specific genjutsu to put the Chunin exams arena to sleep and managed to incapacitate most of the people there. Though it isn't really that impressive since 12-year-old Genin Sakura and Shikamaru were able to resist it. But with that being said, that's pretty much it for the video. I actually forgot to mention Kabuto's different nature releases, but I don't think that really matters since his water styles and whatnot don't really do anything, and this video is almost 20 minutes. But again, make sure to like this video and subscribe, and become a channel member to gain access to exclusive channel perks such as members only videos and live streams. Anyways, I'll catch y'all in the next one. Bye bye!